I love that section because it also presented a novel not as a distant imagined entity, but actually a process. And the reader was drawn into this process of the creation of this entity that the reader is holding in his or her hand.
I have the pleasure of introducing Amit Chaudhuri and Amitava Kumar. These two celebrated authors have each been writing books for 2 decades, and they are here to share their latest novels. I knew there was going to be the comment there. Over 2 decades. How about there? Yeah, there you go. An approximation. Amit Chaudhuri is a novelist, essayist, poet, and musician. A fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, he lives in Calcutta in the United Kingdom, where he's a professor of contemporary literature at the University of East Anglia. Friend of My Youth is his 7th novel. Among Amit's other works are 3 books of essays, the most recent of which is The Origins of Dislike, a study of D.H. Lawrence's poetry, a book of short stories, Real Time, and a work of nonfiction, Calcutta, 2 Years in the City, and 2 volumes of poetry, including Sweet Shop. He has made several recordings of Indian classical and experimental music, and the awards he has received for his fiction include the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Fiction, and the Indian government's Sahitya Akademi Award. In his most recent novel, Friend of My Youth, a novelist also named Amit Chaudhuri returns to Bombay, a city where he grew up. The Bombay he experiences is thick with his childhood memories and with the stories of the recent 2008 terrorist attacks. His last real connection to the place is his friend Ramu, the kind of friend whose presence mends time, but he's absent, away in rehab. As Amit walks through the old streets, through the hallways of the Taj Hotel, as he eats Bombay fry and shops for Joy's shoes, he attempts to bridge that lost past with the city around him. Friend of My Youth, through quiet inquiry, interrogates that relationship between the writer and the work. What of the story belongs to him? What of the story really belongs to anyone? Amitava Kumar is a writer and journalist. He was born in Ara and grew up in the nearby town of Patna, and these are not my words, a city famous for its corruption, crushing poverty, and delicious mangoes. Amitava is the author of several books of nonfiction and a novel. He lives in Poughkeepsie in upstate New York, where he is Helen D. Lockwood Professor of English at Vassar College. In 2016, he was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship as well as a Ford Fellowship in Literature from United States artists. His latest novel, Immigrant Montana, came out last year to wonderful reviews, named a notable book by the New York Times and one of New Yorker's best books of the year. It tells the story of Kailash, a young man who arrives to the U.S. from India during the post-Reagan era. Kailash is eager for romance, and we watch him fumble and fall in love through a number of relationships, some more quick to fail than others, and we watch as he also endures a kind of intellectual love under the tutelage of a charismatic professor of post-colonial studies. The now older Kailash tries to make sense of those early years, of those attempts at becoming. The book includes newspaper clippings, photos, sketches, art, and footnotes, an energy that can just barely be contained. Reading this book reminds you that one of the joys of fiction is that it can do anything it wants, and that the best books defy any kind of categorization. I'm so honored to have these 2 authors here tonight in conversation. Please join me in welcoming Amit and Amitava.
I was asked to read first, so I'll do that.
Do we have to start with the readings? Or?
I think that was the plan.
Okay.
Yep. Amit is a friend of my youth. Hey, of all the interlocutors you're having on this long tour, how many people can claim that? You know what I'm saying?
True. I mean, I can.
Yeah. Amit is a friend of my youth. He's only a year and 2 months and 2 days older than me. But I always call him Amit Da, which means elder brother Amit, for 2 reasons. One, because of his many accomplishments. But the other reason is that in India, the elder brother's wife, the woman who is married to your elder brother, is your half-wife. I mean, the relationship is not sexual, but would it be right to say, in the way that you use finely discriminating words, that it is not asexual?
What are you talking about?
She'll be coming here shortly. We'll discuss this when she's here. All right. There is a friendship. There's a friendship and that is also at the heart of my novel. It is the love that my characters, but also certainly my narrator, feels toward his mentor, who is someone who has journeyed a lot and has done some amazing things. Is that my phone by any chance? No, someone else's phone. Because my child sometimes takes my son's phone, so you just put it on. And one of the things I do, I'm going here off on what Shuchi said about what fiction can do is, the person I was thinking about was a gentleman who was born in a village not far from mine. He migrated across India to Pakistan when Pakistan became a country. And John Berger wrote about him, And this man, as a young man, comes to America, gets a fellowship to Princeton, goes across to Tunisia to do his work, gets involved in the Algerian struggle. And when he comes to the US, back after doing his PhD work, he gets arrested for conspiring to kidnap Kissinger. A worthy cause, I might add. And, he didn't acquire any fame necessarily, but he was a good friend of people like Edward Said and Howard Zinn and your local man Noam Chomsky, and they all dedicated books to him. So one of the things I did at one point was I thought of a letter that he had once written, this man, Iqbal Ahmed, who appears in my novel as Ehsan Ali. A piece he had written, a letter he had written to Edward Said, and I thought if I could channel that voice and write that same letter again. So I'm just going to read first that letter to you. Son of Palestine, friend and ally to the wretched of the earth, keeper of the flame in the world, the text and the critic. I made a brave attempt to attend your talk yesterday, but the press of bodies at the door was deeper and denser than even experienced in the tin box buses on the crowded, sticky streets of Lahore or Accra. I saw the brief dazzle of your features and admired from a distance the elegant shine on your Savile Row suit. Then you began to speak. Such flowing oratory. Has anyone else ever been more eloquent on the narrow and constricted semantic field through which Islam is interpreted in the West? I wanted to hear you and discuss these things in person and not from behind a wall of perspiring bodies. When will you provide this timid and undeserving soul the benefit of your attention? When I'm going to read on that letter, but just I should tell you that when Iqbal Ahmed died, Edward Said at his first memorial read out the letter I'm modeling this on. And he said that I could see that what he was really doing in that exorbitant language was providing a very deft critique of the way I had not adequately represented Islam and our histories. So I'll just go on. As your local star who had one idea and therefore was hired at Harvard, Homi Bhabha said it, it's all about mimicry, but mimicry in a way that is also about mockery. Because if you have more than one I published The Attached in Dawn last week. It was already in production, alas, by the time your own words on the subject fell like rain on my parched soul at your public address last afternoon. And I hope you will read it. I have tried in my own weak way to say something meaningful about Islam, not only by saying that the Western construction of Islam is a fiction, a purely ideological construct, but by insisting on presenting the concrete, not to mention divided struggles underway in polities that happen to be Islamic. As always, with a sense of devotion that is your due and tender regards, I remain Ehsan of no consequence. So that's a little letter. But my narrator, he comes to this country as a new immigrant, and his friend, the friend of his youth, really, is Dr. Ruth, whom he hears on the radio. How many of you know who is Dr. Ruth? Some of you, the young ones. Dr. Ruth, Dr. Ruth. I think you'll find it from the context. Let me read that. This will be revealing. In America, the land of the free and home of the brave, it was possible, figuratively speaking, to discuss genitalia in public. I discovered this when I turned on the radio one Tuesday night in my university apartment in Morningside Heights and heard a woman's voice. A foreign accent. Except the surprise was that she was talking about sex. She sounded like Henry Kissinger. Her name was Dr. Ruth. Unlike Kissinger, she wanted us to make love, not war. In India, the only public mentions of sex were the advertisements painted on the walls that ran beside the railway tracks. I read the ads when I travelled from Patna to Delhi for college and was filled with anxiety about what awaited me when, at last, I would experience sex. On the brick walls near the tracks, large white letters in Hindi urged you to call a phone number if you suffered from premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction or nightly emissions. A nation of silent sufferers. Men with worried brows holding their heads in their offices during the day, and back at home lying miserably awake beside quiet and disappointed wives in the dark. Is this what you intended for the transnational literature series? But not in America, where Dr. Ruth was talking to you cheerfully on the airwaves. I had no accurate idea of what epiglottis and guttural really meant, but those words vibrated in my mind when I listened to Dr. Ruth, her voice on the small black radio in the privacy of my room, offering advice to the males among her audience. Even if they themselves had already climaxed, they could help their female partners achieve orgasm. You can just pleasure her. I hadn't heard that word used as a verb before. I also spoke in an accented English. I wondered if Dr. Ruth's usage was correct. And for women out there, a man wants an orgasm, big deal, give him an orgasm, it takes 2 minutes. Such relief, for more than one reason. There were details about her that I discovered later. Dr. Ruth grew up in an orphanage. Her parents perished at Auschwitz. She was very short but had fought in a war. She was once a guerrilla in the Haganah, and now in this country, she was famous for talking about masturbation and penises and vaginas on the radio. She was on her 3rd marriage. Listening to Dr. Ruth on the radio that Tuesday night in Upper Manhattan, I was transported in my mind back to a morning in Delhi, earlier that year, when we were enjoying 3 days of spring. You know how your character, your narrator, who might or might not be you, when he talks to Ramu, he's often talking about masturbation. About
He's not me. That's just,
I know.
it's just fictional.
They call it shagging, which was very interesting, a term that I remembered from my own time in school. So in that same way, I want to distance myself from my own narrator, who's going to hear this following disquisition. The other Dr. Ruth from his childhood. I have a student here, oh my God, 25 years ago. This is embarrassing to read this, but anyway. The year I left, 1990. My friends were in my room in the college dorm. The daughter of the warden walked past the window on her way to work, her hair still hanging damp on her yellow dupatta. She was a postdoc in history and would become a lecturer soon. And then we were running to the end of the corridor to watch the warden's daughter open the little wooden gate on her way to the bus stop. Her prepossessing calm, her very indifference to the existence of gawking others was an incitement to collective lust. She was soon gone, and still excited but also somewhat let down, the group returned to my small room with its dirty, whitewashed walls. "There is nothing purer than the love for your landlord's daughter," said Bhim. "No," said Santosh after an appropriate pause. "If you're looking for innocence, the purest Ganga Jal, you have to be in love with your teacher's wife." As if to sort out the matter, we looked at Noni, a Sikh from Patiala. He was the only one among us who wasn't a virgin. Noni took off his turban and his long hair fell over his shoulders. "You bastards should stop pretending. The only true love, true first love, is the love for your maidservant." This was duly appreciated, but Noni was not done yet. "She has to be older than you, though not by too much. And while it's not necessary for you to have fucked her, it is important that she take your hand in hers and put it on her breast." There was the usual silence that greets the utterance of grand truth. Three of us were sprawled next to each other on the bed, our heads pillowed against the wall. Dark, oily smudges behind us indicated where other heads had pressed in the past. Then someone started laughing. "You're a bunch of," Noni said to dismiss the laughter. When you went back home during the winter, did any one of you get laid?" He smiled and announced his success with another question. "Has anyone slept with a friend's mother?" "I have," Bhim said. He had light-colored eyes. He was smiling a soft, secret smile. "Whose mother?" Noni asked. "Yours." Thank you. All right, Amit.
Recovering from that, the shock of being exposed to your, your deepest thoughts. Anyway, this is working, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'll just give you a tiny bit of context. Friend of my youth is set in 2011 March, and the main character, no, he's not the main, one of the main characters who shares a name with me, Amit Chaudhuri. Very difficult to say this name, but this man arrives in Bombay to do a reading from his fifth novel, The Immortals, which, as it happens, is also my fifth novel. And so he's staying in a club in Malabar Hill, and the novel is structured. It's a very, very short novel, so it's structured in three parts. The longest bit is about this is leading up to the reading, although the reading never happens. So that's the kind of tension building up. Actually, not. But there are sources of unsettlement during this 1.5 days of the visit. That's kind of described in the book, in the first 2/3 of the book. The sources of unsettlement have to do with the fact that Amit realizes he can't access Ramu, his friend from his youth, the one person from his youth who still lives in Bombay, who's a recovering drug addict, who almost died, and after that kind of had a wake-up call and is now in rehab, but in a rehab outside Bombay where he cannot access the outside world. He went voluntarily into that rehab. The absence of being the inability to access this absent friend has a kind of strange effect on Amit. Something that he wouldn't have expected if somebody had asked him this prior to this happening. Are you going to be terribly sort of out of sorts if Ramu is no longer accessible in Bombay, or no longer is in Bombay? He would have probably not thought too much about that question. The second source of unsettlement has to do with the fact that Bombay is where he grew up, but he has no home there anymore. So he's visiting Bombay and he's staying in a club which overlooks the building in which he grew up, as it happens, and this is a source of unsettlement too, that every time he visits Bombay he must stay in a hotel room or in a room in a club. And the third source of unsettlement are the 26/11, as they are called in India, attacks on Bombay by terrorists. He has to take his mother's shoes and his wife's shoes to the Taj to exchange them. So he confronts the Taj during that visit. And the Taj it looks exactly like it was, but he knows this continuity, or this kind of integrity that the Taj has is an illusion. The Taj is a hotel with the shoe shop. So because the Taj was gutted, much of it, in a fire, and then it was rebuilt.
During the terrorist attack.
It was gutted during this thank you. So the continuity that he confronts of Bombay being the Bombay of now, but also being the same Bombay in which he grew up, that too he knows is illusory. And that comes to him from the visit to the Taj. That's the first 2/3 of the book. Then there are two short sections in which Ramu gets out of rehab and is back in Bombay again. And the third section is when Amit and his wife and daughter go to the Taj, in fact, for a holiday. He goes to Bombay to not read from a work, which he's usually doing, but just to do nothing. So I'm going to read out something from the first section, the end of the first section, where he's reminded that the reading will happen that afternoon. And I'm going to read out a couple of pages from that last section in the Taj. So he's just been visiting to sign books, a bookshop called Strand Bookstore or Strand Bookshop. I step out, book in one hand. It's 6 memos for the next millennium. Some books I buy for their title, others for brevity. I love short books, the way you know from the first page that it's going to end. So I'll see you at 6:15. The reading is at 6:30. We've been speculating on the possible size of the audience. It's hard to shepherd people into readings in Bombay. Janardhan shakes his head in agreement. It's 3:30. Janardhan is the publishing rep. I cross the road. Stacks of sugarcane being pulped by an old flecked grinder. 3 flattened bouquets. Pale green juice. High risk of jaundice if you drink a glass. That meal at Apurva, I haven't seen Ramu since. I've often thought of my last sighting of him in front of the yacht club at night. It's only occurred to me now that, of course, it was after the reading, that abortive jaunt to Trishna, the Ravas at Apurva. The Ravas is the name of a fish. A long table. Ramu making semi-serious conversation with Arundhati. Arundhati's steely indifference when Anand burst into a raga. Anand and Menaka suddenly talking to each other, mildly combative, in French. Later the contingent began to walk to Regal Cinema. Not that late, 11 o'clock. Through the dark arcade. Anand following one demonstration of a rag with another. We lost Ramu and a young short story writer called Sumit. For 7 or 8 minutes they were absent. Then as we came to the wide angles of Kala Ghoda, they emerged from a back street, sheepish and triumphant. Fair weather friends. I couldn't tell if they'd had a joint or if Ramu was still clean. People began to get into the silently lined and watching taxis. It's odd how unself-conscious and at home people are in this part of the city. But how, come midnight, they'll start returning to Juhu and Bandra an hour away. Waves and farewells. Yet 2 or 3 of us decided to catch a final glimpse of Apollo Bandar. Ramu was terribly tired and opted out. I suspect he'd had enough of the writers. Fuck, it was an effort to lift one foot after another, he told me on the phone the next day. It was as if the distance from Rhythm House to Regal was a mile. I was wondering when it would end. He'd parked his scooter at the yacht club. We said bye to him there. A part of me felt bad, don't know why, leaving him. As if I were deserting him. Ramu prodding the pedal repeatedly with one foot till the familiar racket began. Under a Gothic arch. I thought I'd see him again, somehow. The uncertainty I feel about whether I'll see Ramu again came to me once before. Of course, I know the formulation is absurd. It's not whether I'll see him, but when. According to his sister, it will be another year. What I feel isn't so much like parental anxiety. With the prolonged absence of a child, say, the irrational part of the parent's brain will rush to the possibility of never seeing the child again. This isn't what I feel. I know I'll see Ramu again. But it's as if I won't see him again. I'm thrown off balance, but also surprised. I didn't know I'd react like this. Ramu isn't the only close friend I have. But it's as if my sojourn in Bombay depends on him. Depends is the wrong word. I haven't come here because of him to delve into his whereabouts. But the surprise I've mentioned is related to my astonishment at being here. Astonishment denotes how you might start seeing things you hadn't noticed earlier, but it could also mean becoming aware that you won't see them again. As I turned into Firoz Shah Mehta Road and then left into the long stretch of DN Road, I know I won't see Bombay again. That is, I will see Bombay again, but not the Bombay I'm looking at now. I belch and release the ghost of Bombil. This is the fish he's just eaten, a fried fish. I need this walk. The first time I had that hunch that my sighting of Ramu when I said bye to him had a finality that neither he nor I was fully aware of, though in a way both of us were, was at GT Hospital, the psychiatric wing. He'd almost died, but, as the doctor said, had returned to life against medical logic. I was in Bombay again for a cultural festival. Again, I was in the yacht club. If the hosts won't put me up in a good hotel, I'll ask to stay in a club that's well located. The event was in Bandra. Later I, Arjun, Ramu and Amrita, whom Ramu and I knew from college and was seeing after 20 years, thought we'd go to a seafood restaurant. But Ramu broke away early, reminding us it took an hour to get to Colaba. I was headed there too, but not yet. He set out on his scooter and at some point must have changed his mind and decided to check out the entrance of the Prince of Wales Museum for pushers at midnight. He overdosed there on dodgy heroin, and when a constable discovered him at 3 a.m., his blood pressure was near zero. This nameless constable found a friend's number on a piece of paper in Ramu's wallet, called him. The friend phoned Ramu's father. Ramu's father had to run down Colaba Causeway because there were no taxis to be seen at 3:30. He got his unconscious son to GT Hospital. The rooms at the yacht club are cavernous, but the skylights have no curtains. I was woken by an orange glow above me. Thankfully, day begins late in Bombay. By and by, I called Ramu. A maid with no Hindi kept picking up the phone. She instructed me in Marathi that Ramu was in the hospital. I wondered if his father had fallen ill. He was then 80 years old. In the evening, at long last, I spoke to Ramu's father. He related the sequence to me. I said I'd go to GT Hospital the next day. I didn't know where GT Hospital was. I was told it was next to Crawford Market. I'd been to Crawford Market as a child, a willing accomplice in my parents' expeditions to gather Alfonso mangoes or track down Bombay duck, or to go from there in the heat to the alleys of Zaveri Bazaar to browse gold jewellery. In the morning, I found GT Hospital in the midst of this. I hadn't known. I went into a driveway. I confronted an unostentatious colonial structure. Bombay doesn't know me, but also there's so much of Bombay I've just begun to know. Through the corridors, I went to ICU 2. Families on a bench outside. A girl in a salwar kameez reading the Bible, the page open at Samuel. He'd come back from the dead, the young doctor, an intern from a small town, told me. It defied reason. I loved the hospital, its resolute calm, its ability to accommodate, even in the bustling main stairways, droves of family members and well-wishers. When he got better, Ramu showed the doctor an interview with me that had appeared the previous day in the Times of India, with a photo of me squinting in the sunlight on Carter Road. "This is very good," said the doctor, moving his head in consternation, as if he'd examined something infinitely stranger than a medical report. "Very good." They moved Ramu 2 days later to the psychiatric ward, compulsory because of the overdose. All free of charge. I marveled at these easy, unimpeded transitions from ward to ward. Every room there had the depth and width inherent in rooms in buildings the British left behind. Most people in the ward were laboring people and workers. When I went to see Ramu, they were all quietly eating lunch. Not Ramu, he was awaiting a tiffin carrier from home. We sat on his bed, talked, and strangest of all, treated the surroundings as normal. Strange for us, ordinarily so intolerant.
So, we should talk a little bit. Amit, you have something to say?
Tell us a little bit about the writing of your new book and the way in which it is a departure from what you've written before.
Yeah. I mean, even when I was writing my first book, I thought I should mix together photography and journalism and
Is that passport photos?
Passport photos. But here I was doing it in fiction. And one of the things, in your case, I don't know about people who have yet read Friend of My Youth. I mean, that phrase I used from Dr. Ruth, you can pleasure her. Amit Chaudhuri always pleasures me. You know what I'm saying?
First she said that it's about in relation to my wife in some way, and now...
But the pleasure of the novel is that it allows for... It always draws you back to life, as if it is based in the quote-unquote real, and yet it is that little play away from life which produces all the excitement. And that's what I thought I was myself doing too. And even when I was presenting, details, let's say, about Iqbal Ahmed's life, or what I felt were the realities of young people protesting the Gulf War, or a young person thinking, how can I write about an earlier moment where Indian soldiers were in Iraq, for example. I always thought, how do I produce just this little play, in this Jeff Dyer, who we both, in fact, one of our first interactions was with Jeff Dyer also on the panel with us in Jaipur. Remember?
Yes.
15, 20 years ago. The smell of manure, very rich in that space. It was very nice, very colorful and redolent of the peasantry from which
you
we
did
all
a good
come.
job.
Take it.
Yeah.
So Jeff Dyer has an excellent quote about how what you write is an inch from life, and all the play is in that inch, And so that's what I was trying to do.
That is not Jane Austen, is it?
No.
Oh, okay.
One thing I want to tell you though is that while you gave your narrator your own name and he has written Immortals, in my case the guy's name is Kailash. But I thought, and this will sound immodest, but I thought it was very clever of me to give to have an Irish guy called Kalashnikov, and then Kalashnikov becomes AK-47, and then AK-47 becomes AK.
Yeah.
So
I noticed that. I thought it was clever. Yeah. Yeah. No, seriously. I thought, that's clever.
Say. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So that's what I was doing.
In what way is memory different from the books which are more overtly fictional, like Home Products? Or that too, I think, depends a lot on memory. Yeah. I mean, not in an obviously sort of I hate the word autobiographical, but not in an autobiographical sense. But the senses alive when you're writing that when you wrote that book are senses that are informed by the past, I think.
Yeah.
So in what way is this different then from how does memory work differently in a novel like Home Products, where there is no Amitava Kumar, and here where there's an AK?
Yeah. What in the case, and I would be interested in knowing how you were doing it here.
Okay.
Like you said in your reading that in the last section of the book, the narrator goes back, but he hasn't gone back to do a reading. He has instead gone back just like that, But actually, isn't there a little touch of a suggestion that the writer is also researching the book.
Yeah.
In other words, I felt that
I'm going to read, instead of answering a question from you, I'm going to forego the opportunity to do that. And I'm just going to read out that very short
Why
section.
don't you read that?
No, but why don't you finish first?
No, yaar, just read it. There's no. As
No, I just interrupt.
कोई formality नहीं.
I just thought I'd get that out of the way. Just say that I'll read instead of reply. I'll reply to other questions, but
Is that the section where it says the author and the narrator are not one, or do you mean?
That's the one. That's
Yeah.
the one.
Read it.
No, but why don't you finish?
Yeah, come
I was asking you what memory and the way it
it's like being at an Indian dinner. No, please, you take it. You take it.
I was asking about how.
I'll answer it.
You'll
You
come
first
back
read
to
it.
it?
Yes.
Okay, that's a firm commitment then. Okay.
Indians, man.
Okay. Now this is the last opening of the last section, where, as I said, he goes on a kind of holiday. So I'll just read out 3 pages from here. 3 very kind of pages with very large type. I see Bombay sooner than I'd expected, and Ramu. The reason is banal. Barely a month's passed. That is since the last visit, which was to do with the literary festival. My daughter's annual exams are done. My wife has one of her bouts of intense longing. She's keen to leave everything being Calcutta. Jaisalmer, she says. For 2 decades, she's wanted to introduce me to Rajasthan, the forts, palaces, shrines, the brown horizons. But I'm resistant to history. I suppose I've become uncooperative. Are you mad? Do you know how hot it will be? I have no interest in the peacocks. It turns out that our daughter would tolerate going to Bombay, with its shops, cinemas and cafes. Bombay, history's very antithesis. And clearly you don't need an excuse, says my wife. She is at once resigned and invigorated. There's the prospect of much window shopping. Tell you what, I reply, let's stay at the Taj, the old wing. I'll grovel and wheedle a special rate. She stares at me. I don't splurge on hotels. They're taken care of by publishers and festivals. Holidays are combined with readings, a discounted package. And I've never stayed in the old wing. There was never a reason or opportunity, because I grew up in Bombay, so I would want to stay in a hotel in the city you're growing up in. I plead for a reduction. I do my best to impress the manager. You know, I wrote about the Taj for The Guardian the day after 26 November. I see, sir, he says with the requisite gravity. I go on, now shameless. Actually, a bit of my 5th novel describes the Taj. Out of a sense of decency, he gives me a near affordable rate for a sea-facing room. The outing remains a secret. I don't tell my daughter. I want to surprise her. My mother-in-law breaks it to her when they are together. I hear you'll be at the Taj. My daughter forgets to mention this, so we don't know that she knows till I tell her later. I hardly tell anyone in Bombay except Ramu. I don't want Janardhan to take over the visit. This is pure holiday. My wife and I resolve not to tell the wider world because it might be best that people don't know we are staying in a fancy place. It's sure to be held against us. By now I'm well into a book. It's about Bombay. I've been writing it for a year. I tell my wife, it isn't a holiday for me. It's a research trip. It's a well-known fact that no novel is taken seriously in India until a good deal of research has gone into it. This stay in the Taj will be my research. Going down the stairs will be research. So will looking out at the sea. In the meantime, because I'm writing, I'm thinking of Bombay. I think of Ramu. The Ramu I know and the Ramu I'm writing about have become indistinguishable. The same's true of the Bombay I'm recounting from experience and the Bombay I'm assembling through words. This is often how novels begin for me. There's a convergence. I live. Then something prompts me to write. The writing is not about life. It is a form of living. The two happen simultaneously. I love the title Friend of My Youth, from an Alice Munro story. I haven't read the story. That's because the title must have implied a possibility. When that happens, when the title or first paragraph contains a promise, I become spellbound and keep returning to it. The work becomes irrelevant. The writer in me takes over from the reader, and my inchoate premonition of what the story will be dominates the story itself. I've hoarded titles and paragraphs for this reason, but never followed through. Naturally, when I first fell in love with Alice Munro's title, I had no idea that I'd one day want to write about Ramu and Bombay. Ramu was still to vanish. The experience of feeling unexpectedly bereft was to come. So were the attacks of 26th November. As these and other events happened, it's as if the title knew it had to meet them halfway, sensed it and they had been traveling towards each other. The book is a novel. I'm pretty sure of that. What marks out a novel is this: the author and the narrator are not one, even if by coincidence they share the same name. The narrator's views, thoughts, observations, essentially the narrator's life, are his or her own. The narrator might be created by the author but is a mystery to him. The provenance of his or her remarks and actions is never plain. So that substitutes for an answer. So,
I love that section because it also presented a novel not as a distant imagined entity, but actually a process. And the reader was drawn into this process of the creation of this entity that the reader is holding in his or her hand. And my attempt to think about memory in that term is always to present in this book little snippets of, or even sometimes photographs of notebooks and of news reports which have gone into this act of retrieving a memory.
Right.
The other way in which it works is that I mentioned John Berger before. So I had read John Berger, whom I cherish or revere, writing about this man who I was interested in. And this man, Iqbal Ahmed, while cooking for him at the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam, had told a story of how he had migrated and what had happened to him at the border, and then what happened immediately afterwards. And so the recreation of the memory in my case is that I think, okay, I'll stick to that textual history and then create out of my own research and otherwise what happens later. So I've just invented
you've
that
just
story.
Right.
Partition, what happened after that and what happened during that time, or even, I presented it as Berger's story, but it is not Berger who wrote it. I did.
Okay. I'm going to ask you another question. I ask myself the same question. That is, you have mentioned Berger a few times now. Why do you like Berger? Then I'm going to say why. It'll be like a Berger fan club kind of thing. But I'm going to talk about Berger a little bit.
Well, we have Teju here, who is number one fan. He is wearing a button that.
So there might be others as well. I mean,
but he's the number one fan.
Yeah, number one. Fan.
Well, at the present, for example, this, I've mentioned this to you that Michael Ondaatje gave me this, told me Bento's sketchbook, because we were talking about drawing. And that was Berger's book about Spinoza, because Spinoza's nickname was Bento. So there are these philosophical, in fact, TC wrote a review of it for New York Times. There is a disquisitions on Spinoza, his philosophy, in the book, but it's punctuated by meditations on drawing and drawings. And so I like him, among other things, because he's always, from the way I first found him in ways of seeing, making you see anew. It's all about seeing the world around you in new ways.
Right.
And you're aware of that unsteady line in his drawings. And I also think that it is always an invitation that you do the same, or you start, entering that world of seeing and delineating. So that's why I like him. Why do you like him?
Same reasons. I mean, I like his championing of drawing. I like the fact that he's a critic and a fierce critic of the Renaissance. and a critic of the kind of aesthetic we have unconsciously inherited to do with the reproduction of the real, that the Renaissance has given us, as all of us, as a legacy, so that we admire films or paintings or sculptures because every pleat has been reproduced with great accuracy. And he's making a case for the fact that the perfect reproduction of the pleats is not at the center of what the artist's imagination is up to. So he's one of the first people to raise that critique in such a powerful way in recent times. That's why I like him, because I feel exactly the same way. And the title essay of Origins of Dislike is, I quote Berger, and it is about my dislike of Renaissance art and my it's a kind of an account of the Louvre and the topography of the Louvre, and also an account of me ranting to my wife as we walk through it. Yeah.
Okay, tell me this. Have you really not read that Alice Munro story?
No. I read a bit of it. I couldn't...
I think I'm too much of an academic to think that, I can mention that or use that title and not read it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that also...
No, you're a secretly diligent man. Diligence is your secret.
No, boss,
isn't it?
I'm a frivolous.
Yeah.
But listen,
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you that one thing also I wanted to do, and I think you also doing, is presenting memory as being faulty, rather than being memory as fastidious or faithful, or, So in my case, for example, I was listening, I was I actually had my first job, teaching Janice, and I heard on the radio, on NPR, that a wolf had been shot in a place called Immigrant, Montana. And if you're an immigrant, you immediately think, damn, that's my place, I have to go there, But I had misheard it. It was actually Emigrant, Montana. And it would take many years. In fact, not till the year when Obama was accepting his nomination, that an Indian newspaper asked me to go to Denver, and then I went up to Emigrant, Montana. But I nevertheless persisted in calling the book Immigrant, Montana, but also, over 2 pages, saying that I had misheard it,
Yeah.
I feel very bad that I might have...
No, I love the whole kind of thing of mishearing. I once wrote a poem called The
Riots
Writers.
and the Writer and the Rioter.
Yeah.
It's a lovely poem. Can you recite it from memory?
All my work I can recite perfectly from memory.
Naipaul used to actually do it. But try to do it.
No, I can't. It's just to do with mishearing in
On the
2005
BBC.
when the riots were happening
In Paris.
and outside Paris as well. The word rioters, mishearing it as writers. So the writers had gone on rampage at last, after having been, the most spineless group of professionals on the face of the earth, that finally shown what it means to write. They were writing. They were writing. So the poem was that. So I love the whole. My musical project also begins through mishearing, singing Hindustani classical music in the morning, Rag Todi, and suddenly hearing the riff to Leila in some of the notes that I was singing, and that's how it begins. But
that's not a mishearing, boss. That it is actually true.
It is true, but unless
you're being a discerning critic.
But Amitav, when you say seeing anew, it's always there.
तो वो mishearing का.
Okay. Mishearing is a route to seeing something again. Maybe I don't know. I may be wrong, but it's one of the routes to rethinking how things converge.
See.
Anyway,
how are we doing in terms of time? Should we take questions? How do you organize these things? That's a good time to 8 o'clock. Andrew Rosa, my old advisee, is sitting at the back. You got married. How are you doing? Do you have a question, my friend? Can I give you advice? Can Amit give you advice? Amit is a sage.
I'll ask you for advice later.
Okay.
Can you tell us about, I read your book a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
There's a character in it, your professor.
Oh, yeah.
Mentors you and other students, right?
Yeah.
It's based on someone.
Yeah, that's why you should have come early, man. You came late, I noticed. But it's based on a real character. His name is Iqbal Ahmed, Ahmad. He didn't write much, but there's a book of interviews called Confronting Empire, I think. And Edward Said dedicated his book Culture and Imperialism to him, you know. And if you Google his name, you'll see how he was famous for having been arrested with the Catholic brothers, the Berrigan brothers.
Wasn't there a BBC documentary that featured him prominently as well?
Yeah, called The Stories That My Country Told Me, where he goes back in the 50th year of the Indian-Pakistani independence to tell a story about what happened. Why is nationalism a limiting and divisive ideology? And so he becomes a symbol of what could be a cosmopolitanism that we could embrace, you know? So, yeah. Any other thoughts?
It's a very respectful audience.
That because, you know, you read so seriously that people...
No, I was having a laugh.
It's beautiful. Your novel actually has such fine humor, despite your inherent bong intellectual tendencies. You know, the Atil.
But what bong means, they will not.
Bengali. You know, because what happened was, Bengal is the site of the most our earliest intellectual achievements in the country. So the Bhadralok.
No, earliest modern intellectual.
Say.
Yeah, not
So
earliest intellectual.
they have. It's
and even that is open to question. But anyway,
not
yeah,
much.
yeah.
These two representatives, I don't think.
Okay, not open to question.
Yeah,
then.
say. Rinka's like no. Rinka's granduncle was one of the
No, it's
leading artists from Shantiniketan, you know. And Amit, of course, represents
I mean, in
all the qualities of the Renaissance that you hate. You are yourself a Renaissance man.
No, but not in that sense, because I think the Renaissance.
It's a joke, man.
Okay.
God.
No, because the Renaissance man really does give you an idea that people who do a lot of things have some overarching ministerial overseer who is perfectly in control of these various facets of yourself.
Say.
While the reality is far more fitful and also forgetful.
Say.
You know, I mean, you forget the other things you do when you're doing that other thing. You never dream you're going to end up doing what you're doing, whatever it might be. The Renaissance model doesn't take that into account. It just says you're destined to do all of this and you're in perfect control of all of it. You know.
Asha boss, you must say something because people are not asking questions. Can I ask a quick question to
them?
No, to you.
Okay.
But in your case, we are coming at history, let's say a terrorist attack, a little bit more obliquely. You know, in, let's say, I can't remember which one it was. Babri Masjid, the bringing down...
Freedom Song.
The destruction of a mosque comes as almost you're hearing as if it was the sound of a bird call in the distance, but it is very insistent, it is present, but it is not something that is taken up in some very stupid head-on way, you know. And that because that's, you know, it's as if someone were having breakfast and on the TV 2 buildings were on fire, and you are reflecting therefore on the life that these 2 people are leading when you show the buildings on fire and the conversation that is almost desultory taking place. I mean, I'm using this as an analogy.
Sure.
So I want you to speak a little bit about how you think then about art or literature in relation to that sort of history.
Okay.
Why are you
No.
smirking like that?
I'm thinking hard about your question, because it relates to so many things. It doesn't only relate to history; it relates to the way one writes about the human being as well.
Say.
In a novel, I mean, it's the question of whether. So why I speak about the human being is the question of whether you think the novel is about a protagonist, and whether you think the protagonist is at the center of the story. And this is again the Renaissance legacy we were talking about earlier, where the protagonist occupies center stage, and everything else is a prop for his story, as in a photographer's studio in the old days. So there might be a backdrop, there might be other kind of accessories, but basically you're looking at the figure in the center. And
Which is a sacred relationship in the sense, when there was the single work of art, one person would go up to the work of art and would confront it.
right.
While
It's a sacred relationship, absolutely, to not only to do with the work of art, but to do with political images of national monuments. This very short, interesting essay was written a long time ago by Partha Chatterjee, the political scientist, talking about how the early photographs of national monuments in school books in India had, let us say, a dog in them or a bicycle. And then how later the images were emptied of these stray kind of stray presences which didn't add up.
Right.
And how that image was then purified
Kya baat.
and made sacred in a sense.
Sahi.
So one is deeply interested in how the dog comes in and why one is kind of interested in that presence and what it does to the picture, and so one is rejecting that kind of centrality that a particular legacy is giving you. So
That's
I think
beautiful.
so. I think it's related to that maybe. Yeah.
I've had my curiosity satisfied. Other people should ask questions.
Ask him another question.
What's up, Andrew? Why do you want to raise your hand again?
Where do you think you'll go with this style of writing now? Bringing together these documentary things, photos, critical theory stuff.
So,
Boss, this moment is all about branding. So I think that will be my brand. You know what I'm saying? No, really, actually, there's a serious question there. And Amit is tied in that question. Why?
Yeah.
Because the sort of thing we are both doing,
Yes.
if I might,
if you can, if you might, whatever. Yeah.
a slightly bit more playful, approach to the novel writing, where the real is coming in different ways, is being done by many other people too. Let's say Rachel Cusk. I don't know whether it's Cusk or Kusk.
Cusk, I think.
Or Sheila Hetty. But in Rachel Cusk's case, for example, she goes to festivals as a writer,
Yeah.
and other people offer her long, uninterrupted narratives of of their lives. That's not happening in your case.
No.
It's certainly not happening in my case. This is not a writer. There are other things, other histories colliding here and coming in. And so I was thinking of pursuing a little
Including maybe the life that he's written about earlier.
bit.
I mean, he might be sitting in a place talking to somebody. This guy, a place which is written about before.
This guy.
Yeah.
Huh.
There is that as well. There is this kind of question to do with what are our books, and where are we located exactly. One of the but you go ahead. You were in mid flow.
I was going to say that it's too late in the day to pretend that novels, realist novels, like something like, and then Andrew, standing at his window, picked up a glass of water and heard Maggie sobbing in her bed.
That's beautiful.
But instead, that this
is
is
that
how
the
I
next project?
but instead, that this is how this thought came to me, or this is where I was. This is the argument I was engaged in. This is what I heard. If that becomes the domain more, then A, we do not invest in some sort of naive realism, but instead think of novels as written things, and always with history flooding in. And the subjectivity, if we are going to talk about, for example, the Renaissance, is not this Olympian objectivity from which this thing has been, but instead a very complicit production. Cool? And now, to go further with that, I'm very much interested in thinking about, in an era of fake news, where Trump happens to become a better fiction writer, or a more effective, or somehow more popular is the wrong word, a fiction writer, because he's producing daily fictions. So how to counter that with better fictions, but also with a different kind of assertion of where the truth lies. And I think a part of the idea of producing of presenting to your readers the idea that this is how this came to be, where truth is a process, or the writing that is you're encountering, this is how it came to be in front of you, I think is a much more productive idea. So that's where I'm going. Carlo.
So just listen to that. It sounds like your model for the novel is the essay.
Yeah.
I mean, that what you're describing is much more an essayist
Yeah.
attitude.
I have always, or rather in my author's note, I say something about this being an in-between novel where I'm taking that phrase from David Shields. Carlo Rotella, by the way, guys, is a wonderful writer. His book Cut Time, for example, is one of my favorites. That's how I present, think about academic work, which is actually more ethnographic, observant, mixed with memoir and reportage and documentary. So, yeah, but that's what. But not merely essay either.
But mixing up the memoir and the reportage or whatever is not necessarily going to do the work, is it?
What do you mean? Go on. I know you.
I mean, if I think to myself, okay, I don't want to write the usual realist novel.
See,
I'm just going to mix a bit of reportage and photographs, and it's not necessarily going to
no.
Achieve. There's no guarantee.
No.
That
No.
what you're talking about.
You
will
need
be
some
achieved.
sauce. Chutney.
What is it that one needs? You know. And
you've got it. Yes, please.
Just what you're making me think of is a reflection on Cubism. Would that be accurate?
Sure. I mean, because he was talking about Renaissance, let's remember that relationship of the individual's fixed relationship to a fixed sacred art was shattered with Cubism, because cinema had come, the movie camera had come, the idea of a fixed perception had been splintered, fragmented. And the way you're sitting here in the audience, you're also checking your Facebook status update, or you're posting something on Twitter saying this guy is speaking too long. I wish, this which happens at Jaipur, by the way. This guy is talking too much. He should blah, 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 blah. So it's like our perception. There's such an invasion of so many things happening that I do think of that all the time, that yes, our writing should reflect that. And yet, our search for coherence or narrative, that remains dear to me.
This discussion is making me think about other nonfiction novels that I've read recently, and it seems that there's a tendency to wind up with a meta gesture at the end. Like Nausgaard is talking about writing all 5 of the books in book 6. You start talking about writing the very novel that the reader's reading at the end of this book. Cusk is going on tour for her previous books.
That's right.
Do you think have you figured out if there's other possibilities for the non?
First tell me, how does that meta gesture make you feel? Does it like, whoa, it's a bit too cute? Does it make you feel exhausted, tired, wearied?
It depends on how well it's done.
Yeah. Who does it well?
I don't see it as a meta gesture. That's not. I also don't see myself, subscribing to everything that a phrase like meta gesture suggests, which is, on the one hand, you have writers who give you a world without interfering with that world or making you aware of the fact that they're giving you that world, that they are giving you that world. And on the other hand, the meta gesture comes up as a kind of idea in postmodernism.
I only mean it in a technical way. Like
Yeah.
You're reflecting on
The meta
work
gesture,
itself.
the meta gesture is there throughout history in writing. Not just the meta gesture, but the self-reflexive kind of gesture. All the art forms that have the strongest sense of suggesting the real seem to be self-reflexive. The black and white photograph is one of them. The color photograph traditionally never used to work as a powerful enough evocation of reality. Traditionally, it was the black and white photograph that was the domain of that evocation in photography. The black and white photograph is not real. It's white and black shadow. It is a synecdoche. It is a work showing you something, but at the same time showing you a process in which it has been composed. So I think Pessoa's heteronyms are among the most urgent kind of utterances of various kinds of responses to the world, and yet they all come from invented poets. As far as I'm concerned, because you mentioned Knausgard and Kusk, so my first novel came out in 1991, A Strange and Sublime Address. And over there, I think I proclaimed, though I had no idea I was doing so, but I think I did proclaim a kind of method and an ambition. And I proclaimed it in a chapter where there's a power cut in the evening in Calcutta, and they go out for a walk. And just before the lights come back, the boy and his cousins are walking down these narrow alleys in Calcutta, and the narrator says that he was caught up looking at the various things that were happening in the lightless alleys where there were only hurricane lanterns and candles at that point. He was caught up in looking at that, and then the narrator says, what about the story? Somebody would say, the reader would say, come to the point, and there would be no point except the enumeration of those things that had distracted him. So that kind of proclamation, which I was not aware of being a proclamation, but Sumana Roy wrote about it as a manifesto of mine in the LARB, happened in 1991. And I think I have always, for a long time, been trying to look at ways of telling something which do not necessarily believe in the fact that what is arresting is what is going to happen next in the conventional sense. That is not what is arresting either in my work or in anybody's work. I don't think Hitchcock is such an arresting filmmaker because of the what happens next kind of idea. He's arresting because he has such extraordinary distractions within the film, where he's just, to use your word, looking. The camera is looking at something else. I mean, I could give you various examples. The one example that I find really interesting is from Vertigo, where to find out what is happening to this tormented woman who he's following, he goes to find out the local history of, where is it? Is it New Orleans, Los Angeles? Where is San Francisco? So he goes to find out the local history of San Francisco from an old secondhand, the owner of an old secondhand bookstore, and the owner of the bookstore begins to tell him the story of Carlota Valdez, I think is the name of this mythical figure, who was also tormented, and with whose personality this woman is mixing up her own personality. All this is going on, and then very subtly you notice that it's getting dark. It's difficult to see James Stewart and the rest of them, and you think there's something wrong with the film. It's an old film after all. Then they move out and they begin to talk about what they've just heard. James Stewart and his woman friend who's gone with him. And they're standing against the shop window. The man turns on the light. The books suddenly become illuminated. The space becomes illuminated. It's a scene that has no reason to be there. It's not doing anything in terms of, telling you anything about that story. It's just one of Hitchcock's many attempts to smuggle in something which is in excess of. So there's that. There's also, because this question came up earlier, and you quoted those two lines from the next book you're writing. She whispered or something like that. I can't remember.
And to turn on the tap.
Yeah. So there is that. There is, one has to deal with that as well. Whether you are a history writer or a fiction writer, what is wrong with saying, he woke up and he looked at his blah blah blah. what is it that becomes constrained? And I think the argumentation is taking place on that level with how you're approaching this whole business of he woke up and he then. So we were talking about this even yesterday. Roland Barthes' essay or little book, Writing Degree Zero, where he quotes Paul Valery, and he says novels always begin with a sentence like, "The Marchioness went out at 5 o'clock," and he says this is a sentence in the simple past tense, he says, and the simple past tense inaugurates the unreal time of novels, histories, and cosmogonies. And he says it suppresses, this unreal time, the trembling of existence. Now what one is getting at is, I suppose, is this trembling of existence. I don't think what you call the meta gesture need necessarily constrain that any more than anything else. One is fighting against the suppression of that. This is one of the reasons why that first book I mentioned, I decided not to write as an account of my childhood, that this happened to me or happened to someone like me when I was a child, but decided to put it in the moment when something is about to happen.
Can I give you a shorter answer? Fuck. I think the meta gesture is a very flawed gesture. I think the gesture that says I'm writing a novel, if it introduces provisionality, then it is, for me, the right gesture. And what I mean by that, another Bong, Satyajit Ray, had these lovely storyboards for his first film, and for other things too. And why this interests me is, one could, in a way, it is, determining the form that the work is going to take, and therefore it has some sort of that feature, but it's so provisional, The moment is flowing through it like a breeze, And so if what is often read as a meta gesture, if actually it comes in at the right time and suggests the provisionality of this gesture which has produced this book, and for me, that is the entry of life. You breathe life into it.
I think you also need to check out Knausgard for his other kind of sentences besides the meta gesture, whether they are working or not. Maybe they are.
Rinka has a question. Do you guys discuss Roland Barthes at dinner and something like that?
Not dinner, at breakfast.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of what you're saying, so she asked about the meta gesture, and I was thinking of Knausgard, and I was waiting for somebody to ask about autofiction. But say what he said about not coming to the point, or what you're saying about the provisionality of life, about the breeze coming in. The breeze coming in fact, is there in Mrs. Dalloway as well. So or whether we take his quote about not getting to the point, about which we could think of Ulysses itself. Or if we take what you're saying about the breeze coming in, and that immediately reminds any student of literature like me of Mrs. Dalloway. So then how is your work in 2018-19, when you're publishing what you are, different from the quote-unquote modernists? Because you're not modernist writers, really, are you? Or are you?
I don't know these terms, boss. I don't know.
You're just hearing of them for
I'm hearing of modernists for the first time.
Yeah.
Who are they? I don't know. What do you think?
What do I think?
How should we answer?
I think what you said about the breeze is interesting, because it doesn't Mrs. Dalloway maybe, but it reminds me of Kalidas. So Kalidas is no, it's not just the poetic, it's the invisible. So this Kalidas and Ray are connected in their preoccupation with the invisible. That is, the story is not only about what you see in front of you in the frame, it's about something else which will never be resolved. The way Ray does this is through soundtrack. So his cinema is full of stories happening elsewhere which never come to any resolution. Every moment when we have a scene, let us say, where you and I are eating something or talking about something or saying that we have to go somewhere tomorrow, don't forget that, there is always evidence that something is happening in a place that we cannot see. It's not part of the frame. So the life of the story of what's going on in the center is being impacted moment to moment by the invisible, by what will never be seen. Ray is very interested in that, in the continual presence and flow of that. Kalidas too is interested. The way Kalidas talks about it is as the breeze. So Meghdut is about the travels of a man to see his beloved. All the time though, Meghdut means cloud messenger, so it's the time of the monsoons. All the time though, he's being touched by a wind or a breeze, and the breeze has been touched by something else. So there is evidence all the time of being touched or impacted through the breeze by what cannot be seen. So we are not only being asked to look at what's in front of us, but to imagine what we will never see. And I think that's again what we've been talking about the fact that the centrality of the protagonist is not what these works are animated by, are enlivened by.
Asha, we have to end soon, so I'll also give you a 30-second response, which is that, like the modernists, I think our work has to be fragmentary. I often think of modernism as something that suffered from the aftershock of the First World War. Things had become so demolished. The shock was there, and there was a splintering. That's how I think. And I think at this time there is a fragmentary. I certainly in my work want to have that sense of the fragmentary and memories arising like that, But I also I'm taken up by the thing that so many fictions are being spread by WhatsApp in India. So how do I write fiction that still does some counter work? So that I don't think modernism was that much interested in responding to the social exigencies of the era. But I am in that way. You guys have been such a great audience. I'm sorry that Amit spoke for so long, so often, but he's a wonderful writer and a wonderful speaker, and I learn from him all the time. So let's at least applaud him. And
thank you, Amitava. Thanks so much. Thanks for your patience and.
In at least, Kiran Desai in one of her novels has given Amit a page, but in almost every book I have written, I have given Amit a space.
Probably true. Almost every. Really?
Almost every book. Okay. I should have done almost every book, of course.
We have copies of the book for sale here, and they'll be happy to sign up at the front.
All right. Thank you.